neck and my black felt hat. It was like I was going through a door. I knew I was going to go through a door, and I was leaving my past. I was leaving what I was and going into a future of uncertainty. I did have the gun with me, and I had the catch in the rye with me, and I had a piece of cardboard, and I used it to camouflage the shape of the gun in the pocket of my London fog coat. I had the album with me too, the John Lennon album. I brought that with me as a reason for standing out there and being there. It was a ruse. I really didn't want his signature. I wanted his life, and I ended up taking both.
A uniformed officer directed us to the Dakota. He says, "You guys better get up there. All hell broke loose. Somebody shot John Lennon."
I saw another patrolman. He had a white male in custody. And this patrolman said to me that, I don't know what's going on. I think it's a robbery. There might be more inside.
The people were milling around. They seemed to be in shock, in a state of shock. Some women were crying, but other people were just standing there, staring at the entrance to the building.
And at this point, we were ushered in up the stairs and shown to the, what I believe to be, what was at that time anyway, the superintendent's office. And I saw a male, white, lying face down on a carpet in front of his desk. And as I approached him, an Oriental woman said to me that be very, very careful. He's very seriously wounded. We made the decision that he had to go to the hospital now to have any chance of survival.
They brought out Lennon. He was limp. He had blood coming outside of his mouth. He had his glasses on, and there were maybe 5 or 6 police officers holding him, carrying him back seat of a car. Very quickly, Yoko was with him.
A stretcher was wheeled in. 6 to 8 police officers around it, trotting, running it back as fast as they could indoors. They wheeled it inside the room right behind me. The doctor ran in, some other medical people ran in, they pulled the curtain. One police officer stood next to another police officer and whispered, "It's John Lennon."
I had Mr. Lennon by his feet, and my partner had him in his shoulder area, and I think that someone else was assisting him on that end. I didn't know who he was. It had never dawned on me who this was. And my partner kind of said to me, "This is John Lennon." And I looked down and saw what, growing up to me, were Beatle boots. The boot with the zipper up the side. And it was at that moment I realized the enormity of the situation.
John Lennon has been shot dead by a gunman outside the block of flats where he lived in New York.
WNEW-FM, you're on the air.
How could somebody like John Lennon be killed? What kind of a country is this? I remember saying this before. I remember saying this when John Kennedy was shot. I remember saying this when Martin Luther King was shot. I remember saying this when Bobby Kennedy was shot.
Phone rang at 6:30 in the morning, and it was the managing director of the radio station who rang me to say, "We need you in now." And he assumed I already knew. And I said, "But Terry, it's 6:30 in the morning. I'm not on till later today." He said, "You don't know, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." He said, "John Lennon has been shot." And just stunned. I think I dropped the phone. And then I was in the office about an hour later. I was looking at other people as I was driving in, and I thought that they didn't know. Just by how, body posture, things they were doing in the car, fingers tapping on steering wheels, and you're thinking these people don't know yet. So they weren't going to get that news until our main bulletin of the morning, which was 8 o'clock.
This is Morning Report, Radio City's roundup of major world, national and local news. Presented this morning by Roger Wilkes.
Good morning, it's 8 o'clock. John Lennon is dead. He was shot, apparently by a deranged gunman, outside his apartment in New York. The former Beatle fell in a hail of bullets in the front hall of the exclusive block on the Upper West Side in Manhattan.
Our life together is so precious. Together we have grown. We have grown.
Having been to the Dakota on the Friday, having seen the security around them when we went to the studio at 6 o'clock, having been out for dinner with them, having been chauffeured in their limousine. I was with John and Yoko, the others went in the other car. It's something in me, I don't know why, prompted me to ask him about his security. And right at the end of the interview, before I thanked him for his time, I just said, John, this is a city with quite a reputation for violent things happening. How safe do you feel?
I can go right out this door now and go in a restaurant. You want to know how great that is? Mm-hmm. Or go to the movies? I mean, people will come up and ask for autograph or say hi, but they won't bug you, you know?
Very relaxed, very, I think, super confident in the fact that they could do that until the Monday night at 11:15.
We have arrested Mark David Chapman of 55 South Kukui, Kukui Street, Hawaii, for the homicide of John Lennon. Mr. Chapman came up behind him and called to him, Mr. Lennon, as he arrived at that doorway. And then in a combat stance, he emptied the Charter Arms .38 caliber gun that he had with him and shot John Lennon.
I remember that look of the officer as he was dragging John Lennon's body to the back of his patrol car, how he looked at me and cursed me. I never knew what those curse words were, but I could see them on his lips. He was very, very angry and upset. A detective came in and he said, Mark, I want you to come up and maybe answer a few questions for us. This isn't like the movies, Mark. Nobody is going to rough you up. I was in a very surreal, unreal existence, then an utter panic and feeling of just sheer terror and wanting things to go back to the way they were before I had pulled the trigger.
It was sometime after the 11 o'clock news, I got a call to see if I was available the next day, and they told me that John Lennon had been killed, and I just couldn't believe it. It was like all these stations, my phone was ringing all through the night. A lot of people were calling me. They were all frantic. I mean, it was such a big story. They were gathering all their forces, and everybody was getting as many people available to be as available as they could. It was a very big story.
I went upstairs with this new detective. I remember he told me to remove my sweater. And as I was removing it, he just came up and just pulled it off of me, just like, come on. And took mug shots of me. One of these mug shots, from what I heard later, had disappeared and turned up in the press. And it was printed in the New York Post. A very ugly picture. They told me to turn sideways and face forward and took mugshots. And that's when we went down and were paraded and then in through the door and into the dark hallway down to the dark, pitch dark holding cell.
I just remember sitting in a jury box, being seated in a jury box and seeing him brought in. Actually, I'm remembering him with the Catcher in the Rye, just sitting there with the Catcher in the Rye, staring blankly. Oh, I was very sad and angry. I don't think I cried, but I just felt sad and angry. Like, how could somebody be so crazy to do this?
I've been driving to Attica fairly regularly since the mid-1970s. Sometime in 1982, I believe, was our first contact. I think that Mark made as sincere an effort as anyone to try to understand this crime. Mark was very methodical. I mean, the John Lennon murder was a masterpiece of organization and planning and cunning and evil. Mark wants to know why he killed John Lennon. Mark is still looking for an answer in the music. Why did the Beatles' music captivate so many of us? I mean, how did these four kids with guitars from Liverpool, England, totally dominate the world stage during the 1960s?
As a teenager in Liverpool, I thought that every town in the world had their own music scene. I didn't know it was different from anywhere else. I didn't know that one day one of the bands from Liverpool would create a worldwide scene where they would rock the world. I first saw the Beatles at the Lowlands Club in Liverpool, in West Derby Village. It was opposite the Casbah Club that was owned by Pete Best and his family.
I met John at the Casbah. He was very much like every other lad in Liverpool. Sideburns, his Elvis Presley sideburns. But that was part of his image. I mean, he looked great. They had the offer to go to Germany. And the lads had seen me playing drums in the Casbah because I had a band, just a school band, called the Blackjacks. And they needed a drummer. They'd seen me, they'd come down and watch me. So I came down, auditioned the following day, passed the audition. So there I was. I was a Beatle and on my way to Hamburg. And the reason I turn around and say I met John at the Casbah, it was the trip to Hamburg where I got to know John. And there was a big difference in meeting the guy and first impressions. He was like everyone else from Liverpool. Put in a tight corner, you can handle yourself. He could be very acid-tongued if he wanted to be, but at the same time he could be fall over laughing and joking, some of the stuff he was talking about. 6-7 hours an hour we used to play, but through the long hours over there, and consequently, playing day in, day out, we became such a tight, powerful unit. We found when we came back to England that we were only playing like an hour. And it was a breeze, and we just left the kids mesmerised.
The line from the cavern doorway would go all the way down the far end of the street, as far as you could see, and round the block.
I was going through my teen years during the time that the Beatles were starting. I wasn't old enough to go to the cavern, but they used to have a junior cavern club on a Saturday morning where I went.
And we actually lifted the roof, and the following started.
And when we first heard the Beatles, it was absolutely stunning, amazing.
I'd never seen anything like it before, the power of it.
Word went round Liverpool. You have got to see these guys, they're unbelievable. Beatlemania had started. John used to stand on stage and say, where are we going, guys? And we'd all shout out, to the toppermost of the poppermost, which meant the sky's the limit, we're up there. And that was the self-belief that we had in ourselves. And, it was a case of, we're going to be somewhere someday. And that was the driving force as well. Stu decided he was going to leave the band. And left 4 of us. New Year's Day, 1962. Going in to do a record edition on New Year's Day. crazy. But of course, as the world knows now, Decca turned us down. We weren't commercial enough. John was more determined, and then by sheer stroke of fate, luck, whichever way you want to put it, he ran into a guy who knew George Martin. And what happened was, George Martin turned around and said, let me hear the songs. Give me time to think about it. Well, as the world knows, between then and them going back again, around about middle of August, I got kicked out. And they went back with Ringo, because Ringo was in. But in the meantime, Pete was out in the wild blue yonder, so my days as a Beatle had finished. And I suppose their days then had gone to another platform.
Mark is a creature of fiction to a large extent. He had this fantasy world where he was almost one of the Beatles. He was like a fifth Beatle in his own mind. Along with that, from a very early age, and he doesn't remember exactly where they started, he had an elaborate world of little people in his own mind who lived in the walls of his bedroom. And they had elevators going up to little shops and factories, and they would work, and there were millions of them. And when he was happy and things were going his way, he would reward the little people by playing Beatle music. Only Beatle music. He never played any other kind of music for the little people. And this is a kid who's, 8, 9, 10 years old. On the other hand, he was able to express his violent side there, this sort of displaced aggression that he felt toward his father or other kids who had taunted him, bullies who had picked on him, by, in his own mind, pressing buttons and blowing up and eliminating, millions of little people, punishing them for his world not being a perfect world.
Who is he? The Duke of Barnaby.
On your left-hand side now, Rosebery Street, where the Quarrymen played. 2 weeks after they played here, John Lennon met a boy called Paul McCartney. Paul told John, I play guitar and sing. John asked Paul, what did you think of our band, the Quarrymen? Paul told John, you don't sing the right words to the songs, and you don't play the guitar correctly. John gave his guitar to Paul and says, all right, show me what you can do. The first thing Paul did was tune the guitar in. Then he surprised John again. He turned the guitar upside down and played left-handed 20 Flight Rock by Eddie Cochran and Heartbreak Hotel by Elvis Presley. John was impressed. John had an idea. If this boy set up his own band, it could be big opposition for the Quarrymen. 2 weeks later, when they got to know each other more, John asked Paul, would you like to join our band? Paul told John, I'll give it a try. What have I got to lose? And the Lennon and McCartney partnership was born. This is 251 Menlove Avenue, where John Lennon lived from 4 years old to 23 years old, with his Auntie Mimi and Uncle George Smith. John Lennon's earliest memory in life was playing in the back garden with his Auntie Mimi. Behind the high garden wall, John heard the sound of the Salvation Army brass band play. John asked his Auntie Mimi what it was all about. Mimi told John, behind our garden wall, John, is a children's home called Strawberry Field. When they have a party, the band play in the garden. John said as he watched his first band play, he had an idea. At 4 years old, I'd like to be in a band one day. The small bedroom window over the doorway is John's bedroom, where John learned to play the guitar. Mimi told John, the guitar's all right, John, but you'll never make a living out of it.
We in Liverpool are quite cool about our celebrities and our celebrity status. So in Liverpool, don't forget, the Beatles were one of a number of bands who were playing in many, many venues around the city who were just a little bit better than the others. But there were an awful lot of other bands in Liverpool who were considered by people in this city to be as good. It was when the rest of the world started to think they were special that we then had to start thinking, actually, they are.
It was a different sound. It was fun. There was these four guys bobbling around with their, hairstyles and funny suits and whatever. And it was just mayhem. It was complete, total mayhem. You couldn't hear a single song, just screaming.
I have the Billboard chart where the Beatles held the top 5 positions on the National American Pop Chart. I mean, it'll never be done again. And it's staggering. You just look at it. I think one week they had, 8 or 9 different tracks in the top 20. And I don't think pop music has ever been as vibrant.
And then, of course, they did a lot of TV appearances. And that's what gave the charm that people got into them even more so.
I remember the Beatles doing the Royal Command variety show. And I think John said something like, if you don't want to clap your hands or something, rattle your jewellery or something.
I'd just like to say the same as the others. Thanks for the Purple Hearts.
He was always a bit mischievous, but I think everybody loved him for that. Sort of slight irreverence. Well, a lot of irreverence, really.
I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. I just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this. I'm not anti-Christ or anti-religion or anti-God, I never meant what people think I meant by it.
He was the one that was like us. He was one of the lads. He was anti-establishment. He didn't give a monkey's what he said, and that was obvious in many of the press conferences he gave in the States.
How does it feel being a Beatle?
It's just wonderful, wonderful. It's simply wonderful.
Very good. We like it. Or we'd be the Rolling Stones.
Because he didn't do the showbiz thing. He didn't appear to do the showbiz thing, and still seemed to be an all right kind of guy.
If you look at it in school days time, I think if anyone was going to drop a balloon full of cold water onto the bully, it would be somebody like John. I think John had that quality of, knowing what was fair, what wasn't fair, what was fun, what wasn't fun, and pushing it to the limits.
I think what appealed to me about John was that, he was witty, he was political, he didn't muck about, he didn't take prisoners. I mean, he told me an extraordinary story about the concert at Shea Stadium, which, in American terms, I suppose is one of their most famous, that he said that when they got up on stage and plugged the guitars in, there was so much noise that he said that he could have sung anything in the way of lyrics. And to save everybody's blushes, I won't give the demonstration that he gave me, but there was one very famous song, part of their live repertoire at the time, into which John told me he inserted 2 very vulgar words 3 or 4 times, and nobody knew because it was just so deafening. And that, of course, in a way, I think, was the start of his disillusionment with the whole idea of the Beatles. That to have that sort of adulation on the one hand was fantastic, but in terms of live performance, it must have been nauseating because you couldn't hear yourself think. And it's well documented that I think he was probably the first to say, I can't take much more of this, it's not interesting me anymore, it's hard work and I don't get anything out of it.
The kind of joy that the Beatle phenomenon brought to everyone, warrior or war protester, had a unifying effect, I think, universally. And I think that we all believe that, somehow, no matter how horrible things had been, that we were kind of working it out. And John Lennon was a real symbol that somehow we were working it out.
And I can't remember a specific hour or day or moment when I began this imaginary world of little people. I would talk with them. They were appalled They were informed that I wanted to murder John Lennon. They didn't want me to kill anybody, and I appealed to Satan. I said, give me the opportunity to kill John Lennon, and I will do it.
In November 1966, John met Yoko Ono. They met at the Indigo Gallery in Mason's Yard. She had a one-woman show there, and I think he found it pretty weird. Bear in mind, you see, 1966, John was still quite conservative, but just ready to break out. So when she handed him her business card, which said simply, breathe, it just hit the spot.
I think that his relationship with Yoko Ono was two extremes, and I think he found in her all the madness that was inside him, and they just formed a great partnership. And I think what he found in her, as opposed to his previous wife, was somebody different, completely different, and very quirky, and with really obtuse ideas, which he liked. And he had always had that glint in him that he wanted to be a renegade and do something different. Whereas before he had a very standard life. For right or for wrong, it didn't work for him. He wanted something else. He was always searching for something, as a lot of people are. And in Yoko, he found what he was searching for.
John was a person who surprised people. You know, his life was, full of turns. Unexpected things. He'd do the unexpected.
On some of these sessions when I was an assistant in '67, that's when they brought a bed into the studio for her, because she'd had a miscarriage, so there was a bed in the studio, so she used to rest in the bed. And it stayed there for some time during the period of recording. I can understand, perhaps, why the other guys would have felt, hold on, we're the Beatles, we're four, we shouldn't be five.
Yes, a certain element of Beatle fans probably thought, this is breaking up the Beatles or something. But never mind what poor Cynthia thought, or what Julian thought. I mean, it's, this is the casualties of show business career, if you like.
I think at the time the media were absolutely scandalised by their relationship. You have to bear in mind there was this total love affair with the Beatles, both not just from the public, the media. They'd been a source of very warm stories, but all of a sudden this was a chance of real scandal, real headlines. Was this woman going to tear the Beatles apart? What was going to happen to the band? It was almost like the dissolution of a government.
There was an album they made called The Wedding Album. I actually worked on the wedding album with them. As a celebration of the wedding, they decided that they would make this album, one side of which was going to be this concept of John's heartbeat being on one side of the stereo, Yoko's heartbeat on the other side. And then for I think it's 20 minutes of this last, John is saying Yoko, Yoko, Yoko. And Yoko is saying John, John, John. You could see they were so much in love, it was quite fantastic. I mean, you really felt this love between the two people.
Police were overjoyed that in the 18th of October 1968, they were actually busted for cannabis. They were busted, actually, ironically, and rather carelessly, you might say, in their own home in Montague Square in central London. It was, of course, to prove absolutely essential to the American immigration trying to prevent John coming into the United States.
And he did that album where, they were both stark naked on the cover and all the rest of it. Nobody could figure that one out at all. What on earth is this all about?
I think we in Liverpool blamed the women folk for the demise of the Beatles. And I don't think Yoko was very popular in Liverpool at that time.
In the period after Sgt. Pepper, it changed. And the White Album came along and you kept hearing stories about the fact that they weren't spending so much time together. I started to think to myself, this isn't going to last much longer. And they're going to break up.
What burnt them out was, sort of over-adoration, if you like. It became impossible to go anywhere. They couldn't even hear the music because people were screaming,
The Beatles weren't just creatively at the cutting edge. They also were probably the first band to ever set up their own recording company, which was Apple Records. It was on the rooftop of their Savile Row offices where they actually did their final performance as the Beatles, never to be seen again.
Between the summer of 1969 and the summer of 1970, I was a hippie. I had long hair. I had taken drugs.
He introduced me to people in the school who were selling drugs, so we got into it. And it progressed from there to doing more and more drugs. It was like a competition who could do more.
I remember probably the first time I did LSD. I was in my room. I had posters and pictures of the Beatles. And of course, at that time, the Beatles were no longer the Beatles that I had rocked and had the little army men in front of me putting on little concerts for the little people. The Beatles now were into psychedelics. They were into Hindu meditation. They were into long hair and beards, and they fit right along with my plans.
He was always searching, it seemed like, for something. It wasn't nothing like you could pinpoint. I guess it was just like everybody else, just searching. He had the energy and the drive to, you think, that he would make a name for himself with a lot of hard work and dedication. He seemed like he would, with that much energy, would do something worthwhile. But I guess it's channeled in a different direction.
Chapman became obsessed with a book that he discovered, and he read it over and over again. The book was The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. And he identified with Salinger's main character, Holden Caulfield, a fictional character who attacked phonies.
I would look at the books at the library. I had a fantasy where I wanted to go to the back of the library where there's this tree. I had a fantasy where I just wanted to live under that tree with a book. I was very lonely, man. I was lonely. I was walking around lonely, hurting. I was in a lot of pain. I was headed down a deep, dark alley, and I was running out of doors real quick. You get to the back of the alley and there's no light bulbs that work anymore, and there's spider webs, and there's trash bins that haven't been emptied in weeks. That's where I was at. Always try to find a way out, though.
He was in such a state of rage and anger and frustration over his own inability to get his life moving in a positive direction. He directed everything outward and blamed other people, and consciously wanted to hurt as many people as he possibly could, and that's why he selected John Lennon as his target.
Tomorrow on Mugshots, an ex-Marine, an elite cop turned criminal, Rafael Perez, rogue cop, on Mugshots tomorrow at 10 p.m. only on Court TV.
Check this out. Go to some auto insurance company websites.
Link to Titan Master, 6960 Eastgate Boulevard, Lebanon, Tennessee. Or call 1-800-941-3100.
Do you feel that you've developed, John, a kind of shell to insulate yourself from the tremendous masses of people?
I used to have a shell, you see. That,
when you were a kid?
No, when I was a kid, a teenage chip, they called it. But I had a shell as a Beatle. We built up an amazing camouflage around us. Nobody knew what we were talking about. And we had, we felt we had to have this language amongst ourselves and take no, just not let people in, And that was our protection. I felt my protection against infiltration, And then at the end of Beatle touring, we stopped touring because that was it. We'd had enough, And then for 2 years, we all sort of vanished, really. And then went through a depression and paranoia and what's the use and no talent and what can we do, all the bit. And then gradually coming out of it when I met Yoko.
712 with Charles P. Rodney Chandler as the Beatle beat goes on from the John and Yoko Lion. Right here on the 17th floor, Charles P. Rodney Chandler's getting things together with the Beatles, baby, and the Battle of John and Yoko.
You have a song, and one of the lines, and correct me if it's in, Christ, it ain't easy.
Rubbish. I didn't say. The lyrics go, Christ, you know it ain't easy. You know how hard it can be. The way things are going, they're going to crucify me and you, baby.
But in the lyric, you said they were going to crucify you.
Yeah, if you take it literally.
Well, how did you mean it? I know that.
It means everything you want it to mean.
What did you want it to mean?
They're going to crucify me and you and everyone else.
But this business of going to crucify me, what indications have you had that you're about to be crucified?
I'd say we're all about to be crucified if we don't do something about war.
Yes. Oh, well,
okay.
we know. That isn't anything new. That's been said a long time.
Well, who's saying it's something new? Who's making any new claims?
I think the interesting thing about Lennon is when the Beatles split up or disintegrated, that he, more than any of the others, had a sense of purpose, a sense of direction. That is true. A lot of it had come through Yoko, but he embraced that with great enthusiasm. And there's no doubt about it that he did have a tremendous influence.
The best thing we've done so far is talk to the people at Berkeley, and we think we had some influence in holding back any violence that was going to come out of that. And we believe that, and we talk to them solid every hour before the march and after.
During this last week.
We talk to them every day. We talk on the phone, on the radio station, live.
I saw them throwing rocks at cops just a couple of days ago. You'd better talk to them a little more.
Well, nobody got shot this time, did they?
No, nobody got shot.
What are you doing about it?
What am I doing about it? I'm cheering the police. That's precisely what I'm doing about it.
Why?
Now, you people have a home in London. Are you permitting people to come in and defecate on the rugs, smash the furniture, and beat you up?
Violence in that
Then why do you want them to do it at Berkeley?
We don't want them to do it at Berkeley. We're telling them to protest some other way. If they'd stayed in bed at Berkeley, they wouldn't have got killed.
He, more than any high-profile rock star, embodied what was going on at that time. The sense of being against the Vietnam War, of being in favour of peace.
War is over if you want it.
And this is the time, initially, when it was not at all cool to be involved in it. It was no surprise that the FBI were looking into him. This man, his voice was very powerful.
How much can we do alive or dead? I don't want to be Mr. and Mrs. Dead Saint of 1970.
John was always seen as a reactionary, and nobody really knew what he was active in. I mean, he's only coming out now, what some of the things that he's doing, and release of FBI papers and so on.
The questions asked by, I presume, Washington, the CIA, and seemingly everybody else about John as a political activist, John as a funder of organizations. I think John was the first to admit publicly that on a couple of occasions he probably donated money to causes which he hadn't researched as well as he might have done.
Where he was going to take that, we'll never really know. I mean, he may have ended up a politician. You know, stranger things have happened.
I think he felt suicidal. He felt like this, in his own word, his ultimate nobodiness, and talks about finding that book which drove him over the edge. John Lennon, the ultimate somebody, probably the most popular, universally beloved man on the planet at that point in history. And Mark David Chapman, the borderline mentally ill, wandering back and forth, searching for anything to give meaning to a totally meaningless existence.
I left in April or May of 1977 to go to Hawaii to kill myself. I flew back to Atlanta and came back again, tried to get my life together, stayed at the Y again, got a job at Frito-Lay, couldn't keep that job, then tried to commit suicide again. I was drinking.
Do I think he could have ever committed suicide? No. I think probably his feelings of it being too sinful to commit suicide. And I think probably he also is a person who couldn't tolerate pain.
The next day after I tried to kill myself, I drove back to Waikiki and then sat there all night in front of the Moana looking at it. Then got up and walked, a good half mile to the Waikiki Mental Health Clinic, which was Diamond Head direction. And during that spring in February is when I decided that I'd like to go on a trip to the Orient. I want to see the Orient. I eventually ended up at Waters World Travel. I went there. I met Gloria in February. She plotted the whole trip, and then eventually I said, gee, if I'm going that way, I might as well just accomplish a dream I've always had, just traveling around the world.
Gloria is one of the most, I think, devoted, dedicated, sincere people I've ever met in my life. She genuinely loves Mark. Maybe love is not even strong enough a word. She worships her husband. Her life has consisted of working and saving her money and coming here from Hawaii 2 or 3 times a year to visit Mark in prison when they can spend up to 42 hours at a time together as part of the family visit program.
When Gloria and I got serious, perhaps at the beginning of '79, we started talking about marriage. We were married in June of 1979. My jobs were volunteer at first at the hospital, then at Texaco, pumping gas and vacuuming cars. We stopped going to church, just becoming more and more isolationist. It was kind of bad because I was removing myself from all my roots. And I became more and more sheltered, more and more drawn in, more and more paranoid, more and more sensitive and hurting. I had made a big mistake running from my problems and trying to isolate myself because my problems became mythical in proportion, and then they became very, very real and damaging. This is the same person that toward the end there was calling bomb threats, harassing the Krishnas, talking to little people through the imaginary television. You separate yourself from the world you know, you have to invent your own. And that's what I did. I invented my own world. And I became so much into myself, I just didn't even really have a reason for living anymore. I started to hate people, despise people.
October 9th.
So what are we looking for here?
John liked traveling, and he liked going to a lot of places, and in order to fight this deportation, in order to be allowed to stay here, he had to stay here until the fight was done, because they felt that they left, they wouldn't be able to come back.
Everybody kind of watched Channel 5 at 10 o'clock in those days, and Lennon came up to me and said, "Can you help me?" And I thought he was kidding. Turns out he wasn't kidding. He was asking me to help him with his deportation matter. We actually walked around here and we talked about it after I realized he wasn't kidding. And I said, what's happening to you is probably political, but they're couching it in legal terms.
The Nixon administration, however, felt that there was a potential threat since John was so popular. And so they started different procedures, different moves to try to expel him, to deport him.
All we are saying is give peace a chance.
You have to remember the times. These were kind of paranoid times for a lot of people, and he was one of those people who felt the government was after him, and the government probably was at that time after him.
There were FBI agents and government agents that were following him and watching his life, and there was a fear that the phones were tapped. There was guys in trench coats and literally, fedora kind of government agent hats standing on the street corner in the village watching his apartment as if that was a normal occurrence. Everybody in the neighborhood was sort of like, yo, who's the government dude watching John and Yoko's house, you know? But for John and Yoko, it was very uncomfortable, you know, to be watched like that, especially when they weren't doing anything wrong.
I think when he settled in New York, we were perhaps a bit miffed that he hadn't settled in Liverpool, but those who are perhaps a little bit more worldly wise realized why that was.
John really considered New York to be sort of a center of the world in the same sense that Rome was at a time, you know, when all the influence of the rest of the world was coming from one place, and John felt that it was a good place to be.
I think Lennon was a New Yorker from the day he got here. I think he certainly felt that. And that's why he so desperately didn't want to leave it.
He'd had a change of lifestyle. So I guess because of that, he did feel very comfortable.
And I tried to tell him that I didn't think, even though I wanted to help him because he was a hero of mine, as he was of so many other people, that me trying to help him might actually hurt him. But what impressed me about him was, despite his fame, and he still was famous, he was very scared. He was petrified that this peccadillo in his life was going to get kicked out of the country, a country that he clearly loved and wanted to be his own. And that, you know, resonated with